Burns. Perfect.
The pregnancy test sat on our bathroom counter like a loaded tool. 2 pink lines staring back at me with all the warmth of a foreclosure notice. I picked it up with the same careful attention I'd give a live wire. You never know when something's going to shock the life out of you. "Jenna?" I called out, my voice echoing off the cheap tile we'd installed 3 years ago, when we still pretended to be happy. "You want to explain this?" My name's Nate Callahan, and I'm an electrician. 38 years old, hands permanently stained with wire grease, and apparently married to a woman who thinks I'm as useful as a broken circuit breaker. I can wire a 20-story building blindfolded, but I couldn't see my own wife's deception if it came with neon signs and a marching band. Jenna appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair perfectly styled, even at 7 in the morning. She worked in HR at Palmer Construction, the same company where I'd been pulling wire for 15 years. That's how we met, actually. I was the blue-collar guy who made her laugh during her lunch breaks. She was the college-educated princess who made me believe I could be more than just another grunt with a tool belt. "Oh," she said, glancing at the test in my hand. "I was going to tell you tonight, over dinner." "Tell me what, exactly?" I set the test down carefully, the way you'd handle evidence at a crime scene. "That we're having a baby, or that you've been screwing Rick Palmer for the past 6 months." Her face went white, then red, then settled into that cold mask she'd been wearing around me for the better part of a year. Rick Palmer, son of the company owner, golden boy project manager, and the kind of guy who wore cologne that cost more than my monthly truck payment. "How did you—" "Your perfume changed," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Started smelling like his office. Then there were the late meetings, the weekend emergencies, and the fact that you haven't looked at me like you actually see me since last Christmas." Jenna straightened her shoulders, and I could practically see her switching into damage control mode. HR training kicking in. "Nate, we need to talk." "We do. Whose kid is it?" The silence stretched between us like a high-tension wire. Outside, I could hear our neighbor Dom starting his truck. He worked the early shift at the plant. Normal people doing normal things while my world rewired itself around me. "It's Rick's," she said finally, "and we're keeping it." I laughed. Actually laughed because what else do you do when your wife tells you she's carrying another man's child and they've already made family plans? "We?" That's interesting use of pronouns, considering I'm apparently not part of this equation. "Don't be dramatic." "Dramatic." I pushed off from the doorframe, and she took a step back. Good. She should be nervous. "My wife just told me she's pregnant with her boss's kid, and I'm being dramatic? Lady, you haven't seen dramatic yet." Our son Jack appeared at the top of the stairs, 13 years old and sharp as a tack. He had my dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and right now those eyes were taking in the tension like a kid who'd learned early to read the room. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Just fine, buddy," I said, forcing my voice level. "Your mom and I are just discussing some changes." Jenna shot me a warning look. "Jack, honey, go get ready for school." After he disappeared back into his room, she turned on me. "Don't you dare involve him in this." "Involve him? Jenna, you blew up his family. He's already involved." "This doesn't have to be ugly, Nate. We can work something out. Rick and we want to do this right." "Right?" I stared at her, this woman I'd loved for 16 years, married for 14, and apparently never really known at all. What's right about any of this? She had the decency to look uncomfortable. I never meant for it to happen this way. But it did happen, for months, in our bed. "No, never here. I wouldn't—" "Oh, well, that's considerate. Where then? His place, hotel rooms, the back seat of that fancy BMW he drives?" "You're being cruel." "I'm being honest. There's a difference." I walked past her into our bedroom and pulled my old army duffel bag from the closet. Started throwing clothes into it with the efficiency of someone who'd packed for deployment more than once. "What are you doing?" "Leaving, tonight. I'll stay at Dom's until I figure out what comes next." "Nate, please. We can talk about this like adults." I stopped packing and looked at her, really looked at her. When had she become a stranger? When had I become invisible to her? "You know what the funny thing is?" I said, "and I actually wanted another kid. Been thinking about it for years. Just didn't realize I'd be raising one for you and Rick Palmer." That evening, I did 2 things. First, I filed for divorce. Then I went out to Jenna's Honda and spent 20 minutes under the hood with my tools. Nothing dangerous. I'm not a psychopath. But when she tried to start it the next morning, all she got was a series of clicks and the kind of electrical failure that would require a very expensive tow to the dealership. Let's see Rick Uber her to the ultrasound. Dom's spare room smelled like motor oil and disappointment, which seemed appropriate for my new living situation. I'd been there 3 weeks when Rick Palmer decided we needed to have a man-to-man conversation. He cornered me in the parking lot after work, all 6'2" of him blocking my path to the truck. Rick had the kind of build that came from expensive gym memberships and personal trainers, not from hauling cable through crawl spaces for 20 years. "Nate, I think we should clear the air," he said, flashing that politician's smile he'd inherited along with his daddy's company. "Clear the air?" I set my tool bag down slowly. "That's what we're calling it? Look, I know this is awkward, but Jenna and we're trying to do the right thing here. For everyone." I had to admire the balls on this guy. Standing there in his pressed khakis and company polo, talking about doing right while he'd been doing my wife for half a year. "The right thing?" I repeated. "Like how you did right by your own wife? Angela know about your extracurricular activities yet?" His smile faltered just a little. "That's different. Angela and I have been having problems for years. And now Jenna and I are having problems too. Funny how that works." "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Nate. You're a good guy, but let's be honest. You and Jenna grew apart. She needs someone who can provide for her, give her the life she deserves." The life she deserves. Like I hadn't been busting my tail for 15 years to give her everything I could. Like the house we'd bought together, the vacations I'd saved for, the nights I'd worked overtime to pay for her college classes. Like none of that counted because I worked with my hands instead of pushing papers around a desk. "You're right," I said. "She deserves someone exactly like you." Rick relaxed, thinking he'd won something. Poor bastard had no idea what was coming. That weekend, Palmer Construction threw its annual summer barbecue at Rick's house. Big shindig. Whole company invited, along with clients and city officials. Rick loved showing off his place. 3-car garage, in-ground pool, the works. I wasn't invited, obviously, but Dom was. And Dom owed me a favor. Rick's pride and joy was a restored 1969 Mustang Boss 429, cherry red with racing stripes. He'd spent 2 years and $40,000 making it perfect. Kept it in the garage like a shrine, only brought it out for special occasions. The barbecue was definitely a special occasion. I spent Saturday morning in Dom's garage, working with some spare parts and a lot of patience. Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous, just a little creative rewiring. The kind of thing that would cause maximum embarrassment with minimum actual damage. Sunday afternoon, Dom called me laughing so hard he could barely talk. "You should have seen it," he wheezed. "Rick's showing off the car to the mayor and half the city council. Fires it up, revs the engine like he's some kind of race car driver. Then boom, backfires so loud it sounds like a sharp crack. Dumps about 3 quarts of oil all over his driveway and starts smoking like a barbecue pit." No kidding. Gets better. The smoke alarm in the garage goes off, sprinkler system kicks in, soaks everybody standing around the car. Rick's screaming about sabotage while the mayor's standing there dripping wet in a $3,000 suit. Sounds like a memorable party. Oh, it was. Especially when Jenna announced to everybody that she and Rick are having a baby. That stopped my laughing. She did what? Big announcement. Had Rick standing next to her with his arm around her waist, both of them grinning like idiots, while his car is still smoking in the background. Real classy timing. After Dom hung up, I sat in his kitchen drinking a beer and thinking about the life I'd built and lost. 16 years with Jenna, and she announces her pregnancy with another man at a company party like it's some kind of celebration. Like I never existed at all. My phone buzzed. Text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Heard about the car. Nice work, Iman. We should talk." Angela Palmer. Rick's wife. This was getting interesting. I met Angela at a coffee shop downtown the next evening. She was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 5'4", with auburn hair, and the kind of sharp intelligence that comes from years of dealing with entitled men. "You sabotaged Rick's car," she said without preamble. "That's a serious accusation." "It's also impressive. I've been wanting to take a baseball bat to that thing for years." She stirred her coffee slowly. "How long have you known?" "About Rick and Jenna?" "Few months. You?" "Longer. Rick's not as smart as he thinks he is. Leaves his phone lying around. Works late on nights when I know there are no projects running. She looked up at me. I hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago. Find anything useful? She slid a manila envelope across the table. Photos, hotel receipts, credit card statements. Rick's been using company funds to pay for their little romantic getaways. That's fraud. I opened the envelope and flipped through the contents. Rick and Jenna going into the Marriott downtown. Rick's company credit card paying for dinner at expensive restaurants I'd never been able to afford. Receipts for jewelry that I'd never seen Jenna wear at home. What do you want from me? Yes, I asked him. Help. Rick's got his daddy's protection at the company, and he's got money for lawyers, but he's also got enemies. People who are tired of watching him coast by on nepotism while better people do the real work. People like me. People exactly like you. She leaned forward. I want to destroy him, Nate. Completely. Take away everything he thinks makes him special. And I think you want the same thing. I closed the envelope and handed it back to her. I'll think about it. But I was already thinking about it. About Rick's smug smile in the parking lot. About Jenna announcing their pregnancy like it was some kind of victory. About 15 years of loyalty to a company that would probably side with the boss's son over the guy who actually knew how to do the work. Yeah, I was definitely thinking about it. 6 years later, I was a different man living a different life. The divorce had gone through without too much drama. Jenna got the house, I got my freedom, and a hefty chunk of debt. I'd left Palmer Construction and started at my own electrical contracting business, working mostly residential jobs and small commercial projects. The money was better, the hours were mine, and I didn't have to pretend to respect people who didn't deserve it. I'd also remarried. Jess was a nurse at the local hospital, 5 years younger than me, with red hair and a laugh that could light up a room. She was 8 months pregnant with our first child together, and for the first time in years, I actually looked forward to coming home. The call came on a Tuesday evening while Jess and I were watching television. Unknown number, which I usually ignored, but something made me pick up. Nate? The voice was shaky, desperate. It took me a second to recognize it. Jenna, I need to talk to you. It's about Jack. Jack, my son, or the kid I'd raised as my son for 13 years before Jenna blew up our family. He was 19 now, a sophomore at the community college, and I hadn't spoken to him since the divorce. Jenna had made it clear that Rick was his father figure now, and I'd respected that boundary even though it ended me. What about Jack? Can you meet me? Please, it's important. Something in her voice, fear maybe or desperation, made me agree. We met at a diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the coffee was strong and the clientele minded their own business. Jenna looked rough. The polished HR professional I'd married had been replaced by a woman with dark circles under her eyes, cheap clothes, and the kind of nervous energy that comes from too much stress and not enough sleep. You look good, she said as I slid into the booth across from her. You don't. What's going on, Jenna? She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she was trying to warm herself from the inside out. Rick and I broke up 2 years ago. Sorry to hear that. I wasn't, but politeness is a hard habit to break. He never wanted to be a father. The whole time I was pregnant, he kept talking about how the baby would change everything, how he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. Then after Jack was born, she shook her head. He tried, I guess, for a while. But he resented having to support us, resented the way a baby changed our relationship. And now? Now he's engaged to his secretary, 24 years old, no kids, no complications. She laughed bitterly. Funny how history repeats itself. I waited. Jenna had always been dramatic, but she hadn't called me after 6 years of silence, just to complain about Rick Palmer's commitment issues. Jack's been asking questions, she said finally, about his father, about you. I'm not his father, Jenna. You made that very clear. That's just it. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I had blood work done last month. Jack needed it for a physical, and the results showed something I didn't expect. She handed me the paper. Medical lab results, the kind of technical jargon that meant nothing to me until I got to the bottom line. Blood type Abe negative. So? Rick is type O positive, Nate. He can't be Jack's father. The words hit me like touching a live wire. What are you saying? I'm saying I lied. 6 years ago, when I told you Jack wasn't yours, I lied. Tears were running down her face now. I was so angry, so caught up in the fantasy of this new life with Rick. I thought if I could just cut you out completely, make a clean break. I stared at the lab results, trying to process what she was telling me. You're saying Jack is my son. I'm saying I don't know. But the blood work suggests it's possible. More than possible. The diner suddenly felt too small, too hot. I needed air, space to think. Why are you telling me this now? Because Jack needs help. We need help. She leaned forward, desperation making her voice crack. Rick stopped paying support when we broke up. I've been working 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. And Jack's talking about dropping out of school to work full-time. He's a smart kid, Nate. He deserves better than this. So you thought you'd come crying to your ex-husband? The one you destroyed? I thought I'd tell the truth to the man who might be my son's father. I stood up, threw a $5 bill on the table. Get a DNA test, Jenna. If Jack is my son, we'll talk. If he's not, don't call me again. The DNA test took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of sleepless nights, of Jess asking questions I couldn't answer, of wondering if the kid I'd loved and lost was actually mine after all. The results came back 99.97% probability of paternity. Jack Callahan was my son. I called Jenna that night. We need to meet, all 3 of us. The reunion was awkward as heck. Jack had grown into a tall, lanky kid who looked more like me than I'd ever noticed before. He had my dark hair, my stubborn jaw, and the kind of quiet intensity that I recognized from my own teenage years. So, he said, after Jenna finished explaining the situation, you're my actual father? Looks that way. And you didn't know? Your mother told me I wasn't. I believed her. Jack looked back and forth between us, processing. This is pretty screwed up. Yeah, I said, and it is. Are you mad at her, I mean? I looked at Jenna, sitting there, trying to disappear into the couch cushions. Was I mad? I'd been furious for 6 years. But now I just felt tired. I'm disappointed, I said finally. But mostly, I'm sorry I missed so much of your life. Jack nodded slowly. Me too. That was the beginning. Over the next few months, Jack and I started building a relationship. He'd come by the house on weekends, help me with projects, meet Jess, and get excited about having a baby sister on the way. He was a good kid, smart, funny, responsible, despite everything he'd been through. But Jenna was a different story. 2 months after the DNA results came back, she showed up at my house with a lawyer and a court summons. She was suing me for 6 years of back child support, claiming I owed her over $60,000 for raising my son. The woman who had lied about paternity, who had cut me out of my son's life, who had let another man play father while the real father paid alimony and started over from scratch, that woman wanted me to pay her for the privilege of being deceived. I called Angela Palmer. We'd kept in touch over the years, bonding over our shared hatred of Rick and Jenna's betrayal. She'd divorced Rick and taken half his assets, but she'd also become something of an expert on revenge. You need to fight this, she said after I explained the situation. And not just in court. Jenna's trying to have it both ways. She wants to be the victim and the villain at the same time. What do you suggest? I suggest you remind her why she shouldn't have messed with an electrician in the first place. The court case was a nightmare. Jenna's lawyer, some slick downtown type who probably charged more per hour than I made in a week, argued that I owed 6 years of child support regardless of whether I'd known Jack was my son. According to him, biology trumped deception, and my failure to pursue paternity testing made me partially responsible for the situation. My lawyer, a scrappy public defender named Martinez, argued that fraud negated any financial obligation. You can't lie to someone about paternity and then demand they pay for the consequences of your lie. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who looked like she'd heard every sob story in the book, wasn't impressed with either argument. Mr. Callahan, she said during one particularly brutal hearing, while I understand your feelings of betrayal, the fact remains that you have a biological obligation to support your child. Your Honor, I said, I was paying alimony to my ex-wife for 6 years. Money that could have been going to support my son was instead supporting the lie she told to keep me away from him. That's a separate issue for a separate court. But it wasn't a separate issue, not really. It was all part of the same pattern, Jenna taking whatever she could get while giving as little as possible in return. That's when Dom's cousin Pete came through with the recording. Pete worked in IT, specializing in data recovery and digital forensics. Perfectly legal work. mostly helping people recover lost files or providing evidence for divorce cases. He'd been quietly digging through Jenna's digital footprint, social media posts, email metadata, anything that was publicly available or legally obtainable. What he found was a voice message Jenna had left for her friend Marcy 3 days after the DNA results came back. A message that had been automatically backed up to the cloud and was technically part of the court's discovery process. "I can't believe this is actually working," Jenna's voice said through Pete's laptop speakers. "I mean, I always suspected Jack might be Nate's, but I never thought I'd be able to prove it. And now he's going to have to pay for everything. 6 years of support, plus ongoing payments. It's like winning the lottery." Marcy's voice responded, "What if he fights it? He can't. The DNA doesn't lie, and the court doesn't care about hurt feelings. I should have done this years ago." I played the recording for Martinez, who smiled for the first time since taking my case. "This changes everything," he said. "She's admitting to fraud, to deliberately concealing paternity for financial gain. No judge in the world is going to award her back support after hearing this." He was right. When we played the recording in court, Jenna's lawyer actually winced. The judge's expression went from stern to disgusted, and her ruling was swift and brutal. "Mrs. Callahan," she said, "your deliberate concealment of paternity information constitutes fraud. Not only am I denying your claim for back support, I'm awarding Mr. Callahan full custody of the minor child, with supervised visitation for you pending a psychological evaluation." Jack wasn't a minor. He was 19. But the judge's point was clear. Jenna had lost any moral authority she might have claimed, and the court wasn't going to reward her deception with money. But the real victory came later, when Pete's investigation turned up something even more damaging. "You're going to love this," he said, showing up at my house with a thick folder of printouts. "Remember how Jenna was always bragging about her HR skills, her professional reputation? Yeah. Turns out she's been skimming from the Employee Assistance Fund at her current job. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger an audit, but it adds up over time." He spread out bank statements, payroll records, and expense reports across my kitchen table. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Fake reimbursements, inflated expense claims, money that was supposed to help employees in crisis going into Jenna's personal account. How much? About $8,000 over 2 years. Not enough for criminal charges, probably, but definitely enough to get her fired and blacklisted from HR work. I stared at the evidence, thinking about poetic justice. Jenna had spent years positioning herself as the responsible one, the professional, the victim of her blue-collar ex-husband's limitations. And all the while, she'd been stealing from people who actually needed help. "What do you want to do with this?" Pete asked. I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. Send it to her boss, anonymously. Jenna was fired 3 days later. The termination was quiet, no criminal charges, no public scandal, just a pink slip and a notation in her personnel file that would make her unemployable in any HR position for the rest of her career. She called me that night, screaming and crying and threatening to sue me for harassment. "You can't prove I had anything to do with it," I said calmly. "I know it was you. Maybe you should have thought about that before you tried to steal money from me and my son. I never stole anything from Jack. No, you just stole 6 years of his life from me and tried to steal $60,000 on top of it." She hung up, but she called back an hour later, and an hour after that. By the fourth call, I'd stopped answering, but I listened to the voicemails. Each one more desperate than the last, each one revealing a little more of the person she'd become. The final message was the most honest thing she'd said in years. "I know you hate me, Nate. I know I deserve it. But please don't let Jack suffer because of what I did. He's a good kid, and he needs his father." She was right about that much. Jack was a good kid, and he did need his father. But he also needed to understand that actions have consequences, and that the people who claim to love you can sometimes hurt you the most. I saved that voicemail. Not for revenge, but for the truth it contained. Sometimes the best evidence of someone's character is what they say when they think no one important is listening. Rick Palmer had been spreading rumors about my business for months before I found out about it. Nothing actionable, nothing I could prove in court, just whispered comments about my work quality, my reliability, my emotional instability following the divorce. The kind of character assassination that happens in small towns where everyone knows everyone else's business. I might never have discovered it if Angela hadn't tipped me off. She still moved in the same social circles as Rick, still heard the gossip and the casual cruelty that passed for conversation among the professionally successful. "He's telling people you're unstable," she said over coffee at our usual diner. "Claims you've been harassing Jenna, that you're bitter about the custody situation and taking it out on anyone connected to Palmer Construction." Custody situation? He's still telling people Jack is his son. Even after the DNA test, even after the court ruling, he's claiming you manipulated the results somehow. I set down my coffee cup carefully. Is that what he's telling his new fiancée? Among others, he's also telling potential clients that you're unreliable, that you cut corners on safety, that hiring you is a liability risk. Angela leaned forward. It's affecting your business, isn't it? It was. 3 jobs canceled in the past month, all without explanation. A contract with the school district that had suddenly gone to a competitor despite my lower bid. Phone calls that went unreturned, emails that disappeared into the void. What do you think I should do about it? Angela smiled, and for a moment I remembered why Rick had been so afraid of her during their divorce. I think you should remind Rick Palmer why electricians are more dangerous than project managers. The plan took weeks to set up. Rick had moved into a new condo downtown, one of those luxury high-rises that catered to young professionals with more money than sense. He'd also bought himself a new toy, a 60-inch smart TV with a surround sound system that he'd been bragging about on social media. Rick had always been a show-off, and his new place was no exception. He'd thrown a housewarming party, invited half the town, and spent the evening giving tours of his smart home setup. What he didn't know was that his fancy new entertainment system had a security vulnerability that any competent electrician could exploit. The beauty of modern technology is that everything's connected. Smart TVs, wireless speakers, home automation systems, they all run on networks that can be accessed if you know what you're doing. And after 20 years of working with electrical systems, I definitely knew what I was doing. I waited until Rick's next big social event, a Super Bowl party that he'd been promoting on Facebook for weeks. Half the town would be there, including several people with smartphones and social media accounts. At exactly halftime, when everyone was gathered around Rick's Pride and Joy television, the system activated. Instead of the game, Rick's guests were treated to a crystal clear recording of Jenna's voice from 6 years earlier. "I'm pregnant, and it's Rick's. We're keeping it." But that wasn't the best part. The best part was what came next. A recording I'd made during one of Rick's man-to-man conversations where he'd bragged about taking Nate's wife and how some men just can't hold on to what they have. The audio played through every speaker in the condo, impossible to ignore or turn off. Rick frantically tried to shut down the system while his guests stood there in stunned silence, listening to him brag about adultery and mock the man whose family he'd destroyed. The whole thing was live-streamed on Facebook by at least 3 different people. By Monday morning, the video had been shared hundreds of times, complete with commentary from people who remembered the original drama and were delighted to see Rick Palmer finally get his comeuppance. But I wasn't done. Pete's investigation had turned up something interesting about Rick's expense account habits. Even after leaving Palmer Construction to start his own consulting firm, Rick had been padding his bills and inflating his costs. Nothing technically illegal, but definitely unethical. And definitely something his clients would want to know about. I had Pete send an anonymous tip to Rick's biggest client, a development company that was building a new shopping center on the north side of town. The tip included copies of Rick's expense reports, receipts that didn't match his billing, and a detailed breakdown of how much money he'd been skimming over the past 2 years. Rick lost the contract within a week. Word spread quickly in the small business community, and by the end of the month, Rick Palmer Consulting was effectively dead. The final piece of the puzzle was Rick's living situation. The luxury condo he'd been so proud of had been purchased with money from his divorce settlement and his inflated consulting fees. With his business gone and his reputation in ruins, he couldn't make the mortgage payments. I didn't have to do anything about that. The bank handled it for me. Rick's condo went into foreclosure 3 months later, and he was forced to move back in with his parents at the age of 46. But the sweetest revenge was watching Jack's reaction to all of this. My son, and he was definitely my son now, had been quietly observing the drama from the sidelines. He'd seen Rick's true character revealed, watched Jenna's lies catch up with her, and witnessed the difference between a man who takes responsibility for his actions and people who blame everyone else for their problems. You know what's funny? Jack said one evening as we worked on wiring his new apartment. Rick used to tell me that real men don't hold grudges, that successful people move on from the past. What do you think about that? I think real men don't sleep with other people's wives and then act like victims when there are consequences. Smart kid. He was definitely going to be okay. The breaking point came on a stormy Thursday night in October. Jess was 2 weeks past her due date, uncomfortable and exhausted, and I was trying to finish a complicated wiring job before the baby arrived. Jack was at the house helping me organize my tools when Jenna showed up. She didn't knock, just walked through the front door like she still lived there, drunk and angry and looking for a fight. "Where is he?" she demanded, swaying slightly in the doorway. "Jack's upstairs," I said, setting down my wire cutters. "And you're drunk. You need to leave. I need to talk to my son. Your son is 19 years old and doesn't want to talk to you. You burned that bridge when you tried to steal money from his father." Jenna laughed, a bitter sound that had nothing to do with humor. "His father? You think being a biological donor makes you a father? I think being there makes you a father, something you prevented me from doing for 6 years. I was protecting him. From what? From having a father who loved him?" Jack appeared at the top of the stairs, looking uncomfortable. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I came to see you, baby, to explain things." "There's nothing to explain," Jack said quietly. "I know what happened. I know what you did." Jenna started up the stairs, but I blocked her path. "You're drunk, Jenna. Go home. This is my son. This is my house, and you're not welcome here." That's when Rick Palmer walked through the front door. I should have been surprised, but I wasn't. Jenna and Rick had been drawn to each other by their shared sense of entitlement, their belief that they deserved whatever they wanted, regardless of who got hurt. Of course, they'd end up back together, at least temporarily. "Problem here, Nate?" Rick asked, trying to sound casual and authoritative at the same time. "Yeah, there's a problem. 2 problems, actually, and they both need to leave my house." Rick stepped closer and I could smell alcohol on his breath, too. "Jenna has a right to see her son. Jenna has supervised visitation rights that she's currently violating by being intoxicated. And you have no rights at all. I raised that boy for 6 years. You tolerated that boy for 6 years while you were screwing his mother. There's a difference." Rick's face flushed red. "You always were a self-righteous bastard. And you always were a trust fund baby who never worked a day in his life. At least I'm consistent." That's when Rick made his mistake. He shoved me, hard enough to send me stumbling backward into the coffee table. I've been in enough fights to know that the first rule of self-defense is to control the environment. My house, my rules, my advantages. I led Rick through the living room toward the garage, letting him think he was chasing me, letting his anger override his common sense. Jenna followed, screaming at both of us to stop, while Jack called emergency from the top of the stairs. The garage was where I kept my serious tools, including a few items I'd been experimenting with for a home security system. Nothing dangerous, nothing that would cause permanent harm, just some creative applications of electrical theory. Rick cornered me near my workbench, threw a wild punch that I easily dodged. He was soft, out of shape, used to intimidating people with his position rather than his physical presence. "You think you won?" he panted, throwing another ineffective punch. "You think destroying my business makes you some kind of hero?" "I think actions have consequences," I said, backing toward the center of the garage. "Something you never learned." Rick charged at me, and I stepped aside, letting his momentum carry him onto the section of floor I'd been working on. The modified electrical mat activated with a low hum, sending a mild but startling shock through his feet. Nothing dangerous. About the same voltage as a dog training collar, but enough to drop him to his knees. "What the heck?" "Wireless electrical system," I explained, holding up the remote control. "I've been working on it for home security. Non-lethal, but very effective." Rick tried to stand up, got another mild shock, and decided to stay put. Jenna appeared in the garage doorway, took one look at Rick kneeling on the floor, and started laughing hysterically. "This is perfect," she said. "This is absolutely perfect. The great Rick Palmer, brought down by a blue-collar electrician." "Shut up, Jenna," Rick snarled. "Why should I? You promised me everything would work out, that we could get Jack back, that we could make Nate pay for humiliating us. And look at you now, on your knees in his garage." That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't a coincidence, wasn't a drunken impulse. Jenna and Rick had planned this, had come here together with some kind of scheme to take Jack away from me. What was the plan? I asked. Provoke me into doing something stupid? Get me arrested so you could claim I was unfit? Jenna's laughter died. It would have worked if I hadn't what? If I hadn't been smarter than both of you? And if I hadn't learned from the last time you tried to destroy my life? Police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Jack had done exactly what I'd taught him to do. Call for help and let the authorities handle it. Here's what's going to happen, I said, looking back and forth between Rick and Jenna. The police are going to arrive, and they're going to find you both intoxicated and trespassing in my home. Rick's going to have to explain why he attacked me in my own garage, and Jenna's going to have to explain why she violated her supervised visitation order. Rick tried to stand again, got another shock, and gave up. You can't prove anything. I don't have to prove anything. I have witnesses, security cameras, and a house full of evidence that you came here looking for trouble. I held up my phone, which had been recording the entire confrontation, plus about 10 minutes of video that's going to look really bad in court. The police arrived 5 minutes later, followed by an ambulance that Rick didn't need but accepted anyway. Detective Sarah Polk, a no-nonsense cop I'd known since high school, took statements from everyone and reviewed the security footage. Self-defense, she concluded after watching Rick throw the first punch. Though I have to say, Nate, that floor thing is pretty creative. Home security system, completely legal. I'm sure it is. She turned to Rick and Jenna, who were sitting in the back of separate patrol cars. These two are going to spend the night in jail. Trespassing, public intoxication, assault. Should give you some peace and quiet. After the police left, I found Jack sitting on the front porch, looking shell-shocked. You okay, son? Yeah, I think so. That was pretty intense. Your mom and Rick, they're not bad people exactly. They're just selfish people who never learned that their actions affect other people. Jack nodded slowly. Do you think they'll leave us alone now? I looked out at the storm clouds, rolling across the sky, lightning flickering in the distance. I think they finally understand that some people fight back when you push them too far. Jess appeared in the doorway, one hand on her swollen belly. Is it over? Yeah, I said, putting my arm around her. It's over. And it was. Rick Palmer moved to another state 6 months later, chasing a job opportunity that probably wouldn't work out any better than his previous schemes. Jenna got sober, got counseling, and eventually rebuilt some kind of relationship with Jack. Not the mother-son bond she'd lost, but something honest and adult and real. As for me, I learned that revenge isn't about getting even. It's about making sure that people who hurt you understand the consequences of their choices. It's about protecting the people you love and building something better from the wreckage of what came before. Jack graduated from college 2 years later with a degree in electrical engineering. My daughter Sarah was born healthy and beautiful, and she adores her big brother. My business is thriving, my marriage is strong, and I sleep well at night knowing that I've fought for what mattered and won. Sometimes the good guys actually do win. You just have to be willing to fight dirty when the situation calls for it. Standing on my front porch that night, watching the lightning illuminate the sky while my family slept safely inside, I finally understood what real victory looks like. It's not about destroying your enemies. It's about building a life so good that their opinions don't matter anymore. The storm passed, the sky cleared, and I went inside to check on my family. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that a man who knows how to work with his hands can build something that lasts.